Howdy, everybody. Humanities 4, Shasta College. We're just on our third day of school. How you doing? Are you adjusting to Canvas? Do you understand Canvas? Have you used Canvas before? If you don't know it, take the tutorial. Everything we do is based on Canvas. Your papers will be submitted there. My lectures will be there. The film clips, everything, the quizzes. It's all on Canvas. If you're having trouble with anything, don't get the lay of the land, contact the IT people. Also, if you're having trouble getting the book, you shouldn't. The book should be in the bookstore. Hopefully, I know it's on Amazon. Buy a cheap copy or rent it. And I think the library even might have some copies. So we're going to have to get that. I won't talk about the book seriously until next week. And hopefully by then you'll have it. We're going to act like you do. If you don't, give me a shout out. You know how to get a hold of me. So today we're on our first official lecture. The other day that was the first welcoming of the class, going over the syllabus, the lay of the land. Now we're going to start talking about film and the culture that created film. Okay, so if you had looked at that one silent movie I should ask you to look at modules, hope you've seen it now. It's called The Man on the Moon. I might quiz you on it. You never know. So please watch it and do your best to enjoy it. It is a surreal trip, and that movie was made about 1902, and that's what they thought. That's what they actually thought how we're going to get to the moon. In a big bullet shot through a cannon, and old men in suits and ties going up to the moon and trying to colonize the moon. What did you see in that movie? Did you see some weird stuff? Well, what you saw was not a lot of tricky camera angles. There was no such thing as that. There's no such things as close-ups or moving camera. They essentially film it like a stage play, and the camera's the audience. And if you notice some weird things about that, besides those old men in big hats and they look like wizards going up, that was a fact. Science to them was wizardry in those days. And they go to the moon. What is the first thing they do when they get up there? They get captured by some moon people, but they kill some real easy. They hit them with their umbrellas, kind of strange. They go to a moonscape. Instead of being welcoming and trying to discover new life forms, they start killing them right off the bat. Not a good sign. That was a colonization of Earth people trying to colonize the moon, not in a good way. And so what do? They get captured. They go to what looks like the king of the moon. And what do they do to him? They kill him. And then they run for their lives, and they're being chased. And they kill these guys pretty easy by hitting them on the heads with their umbrellas. They explode. They get in the capsule, which is bordering on the cliff. They push off, and right at the last minute, one of the moon men jumps on for the ride down. Obviously, there's air in outer space because he's having no trouble breathing. And they fall from outer space to the moon, which essentially is sort of accurate. The only accurate thing in that movie, scientifically wise, was can you think of it? If we're in class, I'd ask you. Was how they landed. They landed in the ocean. That's how we do it. And so they bring the moon man back. They have a big parade. Everybody's happy. And they've enslaved the moon man now. He's in chains. And at the very end, all the people are celebrating these wizards and as a successful accomplishment. And the moon man starts to dance along with his new captors. All is good. Slavery begins, folks. So a lot of interesting things that reflect on who we were at that time over 100 years ago, 120 years ago. That's looks really silly now, but we didn't know a lot then as we do now. Anyway, so that was a good stab at the early sci-fi film, 1902. Hope you watched it. Hope you'll watch it because I just might do a quiz on it. Never know. Uh, Movie theaters, early movies were watched in these things called Nickelodeons, which are essentially a machine they put a nickel in. You go watch through this screen, and the movie would be a minute, maybe 2 minutes at the most. And they're not what we would call movies like they are now. They don't tell a story. It's usually if you watch the opening of that documentary I'm asking you to watch. It's on YouTube for $1.99. Sorry, it has to cost you, but it's called The Story of Film, and it goes along with your book. I used to show it in class for free, but we're not in the class, so you got to get it on your own. Um, these Nickelodeons were so popular, and that usually what they would see is a 2 minute clip of a horse running, a man and woman kissing. That was very risque in the days. That was early porn, folks. Can you imagine? Just kissing was so risque. Churches try to shut it down. And it just showed normal things happening. A train coming into a station blew everybody's mind because the sudden movement. People actually saw that and they moved. They jumped out of their seats thinking the train was coming through the screen. It was magic, and we'd never seen anything like this. And innovators like the Lumiere brothers saw an opportunity here to make some money. And so they actually built these places, a movie theater, which was unheard of. There was live theater because there was plays at vaudeville and all that. People went to see concerts, but they never went to see a movie. And just to show these movies, well, that's good, but there was no movies to show yet. And so people in Hollywood, which wasn't even invented then yet, started fulfilling those movie theaters. A lot of the films, early films, silent films, were made out in New Jersey. Great train robbery, and at 15 minutes, that was considered a long movie. And then they would screen them in these movie theaters. And people couldn't get enough of it. Now, before you say, well, did they miss color? Did they miss sound? Well, no, they didn't, because there was no such thing. You don't miss what you don't know. They were fine with black and white. I'm still fine with it, folks. They're fine with silent, and so am I. But I've had to acquire a taste for it. Didn't come easy to me as a young movie goer. So they saw a niche that they could make money, charge 15 cents, which was a lot of money in those days, and people will sit. Then they discovered they could maybe sell them food and make a lot of money off that. How much money do they make off food now? You break down a movie theater lately, you paid $9 for a small bag of popcorn, $8 for a soft drink. That's where we are now in our culture. If you have kids, you go to the movies, it's going to cost you $100 if your kids are eating all that crap. Anyway, I don't know why it goes together. You want a soft drink and popcorn and a candy bar when you're watching movies. Do you eat at home when you're watching your movie? I do. I sit in front of the movie screen every meal. It just kind of goes with it. Oh, so they saw a niche, a market, if you will, and so then we started building theaters in this country, and they're very elaborate. Maybe you've seen an old movie theater. Maybe you've been at the Cascade here in Reading. There's usually a Cascade in almost every city in America that they didn't tear down. I was just in Astoria. They got one there called the Liberty. They got movie theaters that look like that were built in the early 20th century. They're very usually palatial. They usually have a motif, an Egyptian motif was popular. So because it was that special of a deal. And so they spent a lot of money on making these movie palaces so people would enjoy themselves when they go to the movies. They dressed up, folks, suits and ties and fancy dresses, the children too. And they would go to these things. It became a ritual. And that's when our culture of cinema really begins. The ritual of going to the movies. There was no TV in those days, no radio. There was some phonographs, but not many people could afford them. And so this was a really incredible form of entertainment that they shared with other people in the audience. It really does take an audience to thoroughly enjoy a movie. If you go to a comedy with other people laughing in the audience, it helps you laugh. If you go for an action adventure, it helps. If there's adrenaline's rushing in the movie theater, horror movies are great if you see them with other people sitting around you. Yes, they're strangers, but they're all experiencing the same adrenaline excitement or the humor, and you're sharing in that. And it was a shared experience. And very few art forms besides symphonies was like that. Painting is an individual. You're usually at a museum or an art gallery and you're watching the painting by yourself in a quiet way. So, or dance. There was live theater. There was in those days, lots of it. But this movie thing was a whole new ball game. Now, like I said, did they miss color? No, they didn't miss what they didn't have. Did they miss sound? Well, they had sound. Now, it wasn't people talking. They didn't have a way to record voices yet and match it to the film. But there was always usually live music played with the movie. In large towns, it could be a small orchestra. In smaller towns, it would be a guy on a piano, a woman on an organ, and they would play along to the music. So it's not silent. They had music. Sometimes on an action adventures movies, they would have the sound effects being created live. Horses running, bombs going off, trains. You could hear trains, airplanes. That was all live, and it was done by people in the movie theater as you watch it. So they weren't completely silent. They were not. They were just not hearing the spoken word, but they had subtitles, and the actors were moving their mouths, talking, but we can't hear them. But we didn't need it. The music and the action, the camera was telling the story. If they told it in a clever way, like Charlie Chaplin did, we didn't really need dialogue to explain what was happening. It was a visual medium. These early filmmakers had to do everything visually. You never just saw a scene where people standing still, not doing anything. Yes, there are scenes like that, but then they have subtitles underneath it. Um, I'm not going to talk about sound films today. That doesn't come in until 1927. I'll talk about that next time. But this is how it is right now. People want more movies. They want more sophisticated stories. They just don't want a simple horse running across a field or a boxing match or a dance recital. That's what the movies were in those days. Or like I said, a man and woman kissing. Yes, it was risque in the early adult erotic. And it was erotic because married couples, and nobody kissed in public in those days, folks. Not like they do now. It was a definite a social frowned upon. You could be arrested, actually. So here comes a filmmaker, D.W. Griffith, one of the most famous, innovative filmmakers in the history of film. And he made a film in 1915 or thereabouts called The Birth of a Nation. I'm going to post a little documentary on that today in Mochos. Please watch it. Birth of a Nation was a revolution. It was a game changer. DW came up. He's not the first guy, but he's the guy who really perfected it. Close up. Never had close ups before. It was always the camera was like the audience, and the film was like a stage play. You're watching it from afar. So people saw these things with actors, but they really never saw their faces clearly. And so these actors were never really famous until we started getting close ups. Then people could recognize the faces. You want to go on, sweetheart? I know, yeah. DW also came up with a moving camera. They didn't have dollies and track and stuff that they do now. You don't need to know this stuff, although it's in the book. And I'll show you a little bit of filmmaking stuff. It'll help you in context to understand what a tracking shot is, or a pan shot. The camera pans, or it comes down like this, or goes up. That's all. It hasn't been done yet. DW started doing that with the camera. When he filmed the movie Birth of a Nation takes place during the Civil War. He has battle sequences, huge battle sequences. How did they do that? How did they film it? He put cables across the battlefield. He had hundreds of extras on horses, cannons, rifles, and they'd put these small cameras, hand wound, and they would go along these cables over the actors. In those days, you had to crank your camera with a crank on the side of it. And the frame rate in those days, you don't need to know all this, it's too technical, was about 17, 18 frames a second. What we're used to now is 24 frames a second. The reason why that is, that's natural motion. That's why old silent films kind of look like they're speeded up. And believe it or not, the slower the frame rate, the faster the motion. You want to do slow motion, you got to go more faster frame rate, 60, 90. That will make this image slow down. So he was using the 17 frame rate. That's why everybody in those old movies seem like they're moving strange. Well, they are, because it's 17 frames a second. But they were used to it. That's what they're used to. They didn't miss the other because they hadn't done it. The reason why they started going, I'll tell you about this next week, 24 frames a second, is when they got sound. It was to match up the sound to the image. And it changed the frame rate to 24, which is what we're used to now. Even your video cameras copy that. So if you want it to look like a movie, if you want it to look like a video, then you shoot at 60 frames a second, which is real shiny and sparkly and doesn't look like real life. It looks phony. Doesn't look like a movie. It looks like a home movie. Talk about video work later, not now. But anyway, so D.W. Griffith made this movie, the controversial in the movie, and I'll show when you watch that documentary, it's considered a racist film. In the film, the white people in the town are being attacked by former slaves, escaped slaves. Most of the slaves were white actors painted black. That's right, folks. That's how they rolled. And they were coming towards the town. And in those days, because of racism in America, I don't know if much has changed. Really, I don't. It was considered that black men would rape white women, and they were dirty and slovenly and uneducated, and they would destroy the culture. The town was terrified of this happening, and there's a farmhouse scene, the main central scene in the movie, where these people, white people, are trapped in this farmhouse. They're being invaded by black escaped slaves. They don't know what's going to happen to them. And who comes to rescue them? Who saves the day? Not the army, not the cavalry, not the police. The Ku Klux Klan. That's right, folks. The Klan comes to save the day. And the music is heroic. I think it's usually a lot of times it's William Tell Overture. You know what that is, the 1910 Overture. They're coming to save the day. And people in the audience went crazy. They're cheering because the Ku Klux Klan in all their white robes were, they're all wearing masks and white robes like they do, are coming to save the white people from the horrible, horrible black slaves. Okay, so when this movie came out, it was a huge hit. Box office money was flowing. Woodrow Wilson, who was the president at the time, this would be right at the start of World War I, loved that movie. He showed it many times to his friends at the White House. What happened was, in some inner cities like Detroit and Chicago, Pittsburgh, had black culture, black writers were writing what a racist film it was. They didn't think any white people were reading those papers because there used to be black papers and white papers, folks. That's how we rolled. Now, this is the culture that this film was made in. That's why it fits into the humanities. What's going on in the culture? Well, the culture was saying this film is racist. The white people who made it said, no, 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 we're just depicting history. Well, okay, it's a racist history, and it's being shown at the White House. Well, after these articles came out saying you should re-examine this film because it's spreading racism, and in those days, Jim Crow was still a law in large part of the United States. Folks, Jim Crow, you should look that up, is a vaudevillian term for a guy, a black man who's a shady dandy, a rapist usually. Um, Crow, he's a crow, racist image. And you could actually, and people did, folks, you could actually legally hang a black man for looking at a white woman or talking to one. This is in some states, mostly the southern states. The Emmett Till, which I'm not going to talk about today, but when we talk about Black lives, Black filmmakers, Emmett Till was killed because supposedly he talked to a white woman. Later on, they found him, dogged him down, and killed him. And that started kind of the modern civil rights movement, but we'll talk about that later. So this is what's going on in the culture. We're living in a racist world. And this movie is depicting that in a good way, a positive way. Well, it was so positive that the Ku Klux Klan, their ranks swelled by 150,000 people because of that movie. People wanted to join the Klan. It looked like a cool thing to belong to. Be heroes. Go off and kill a bunch of black people. Woodrow Wilson had to start not having any more screenings because his folks around him said, you shouldn't show this stuff anymore. It's not good for the political image. And D.W. Griffith had explained himself a lot. He explained it by going, I was born in that era, and I'm just depicting what was going on. That's fine. That's okay. It's not an excuse. He didn't have any disclaimers. And so he has this asterisk on his name next to his innovation in cinema. Spielberg, all of them, Scorsese, George Lucas, would never be anywhere without D.W. Griffith's innovations, making this racist film. Later on, Griffith, about 2 years later, did a wonderful film called Intolerance. He tried to make up for it. It's literally the entire history of mankind. He starts with Jesus. And before that, he's in the caveman times. He goes to the biblical times, Roman Empire. It's a huge undertaking. Thousands of extras, huge sets that they had to build. It goes into modern times, which would be right around World War I. People are driving cars, and airplanes are being flown above. Small biplanes that went 30 miles an hour. Anyway, so he tried to make up for it, that movie, to try to get kind of his reputation back. But it's always been said that he didn't have much of a film career, but he's known as the godfather of modern cinema. You judge. I'm going to show you this little film clip. It's a little documentary. I think it's 12 minutes long on the birth of a nation. And the guy's good at explaining what's going on. I'll put that on modules today. I'm not going to keep talking because I want to try to keep these things relatively short. Let me look here. Nickelodeons. I think I hit all the thing I wanted to do today. We'll talk about your journals and reflection. I'm going to post that's your journal, your diary you're going to keep. I'll post some samples soon. We'll see what I'm looking for. That's it. Cinema is on. We're going. And it's only essentially 15 years old, and already people want more and more. And that's when the entire thing moved from the East Coast, where the weather was always bad and unpredictable, to Hollywood. Because why, folks? One simple reason: weather. See you then, next time, when the story film continues.